So it's a funny, weird thing that I have this irrational fear of cops. मुझे पुलिस वालों से बहुत डर लगता है और मुझे पता भी नहीं क्यों. क्योंकि I don't know 70s, 80s, 90s की फिल्मों की वजह से ऐसा है. I don't think so because उस समय फिल्मों में कॉप्स जो आते थे वो या तो शुरू के 10-15 मिनट में गोली खा के मर जाते थे या लास्ट के 15 मिनट में बंदूकें फेंक देते थे. So I don't know what's the origin of this, but मुझे ट्रैफिक पुलिस से भी डर लगता है. मैं अगर सड़क पे अकेला चल रहा हूँ, पैदल हूँ, मेरे पास गाड़ी भी नहीं, आई एम नॉट ब्रेकिंग एनी रूल्स, मैं ट्रैफिक सिग्नल पे खड़ा हूँ और पुलिस वाला मुझे घूर के देख लेता है, आंख में आंख डाल देता है, तो मेरे दिल की धड़कन ऐसे टुल्लू पंप लगाओ ना वैसे चलने लगती है. आई एम लाइक पता नहीं मैंने कुछ गड़बड़ की होगी. सो आई डोंट नो वेदर इट इज द आइडिया ऑफ अ कॉप or the idea of masculinity that they represent or they have come to represent through our cinema which I am afraid of. मुझे पुलिस वालों से डर शायद इसलिए लगता है क्योंकि मुझे मर्दानगी से डर लगता है. Because we have always seen again and again cops delivering justice, cops standing up, protecting people by violent means, or cops, just imposing power on people. तो ये सारे आइडियाज घुल मिल के शायद मेरे दिमाग में कुछ अजीब सा बन गया है. तो मुझे बार बार ये सोचना पड़ता है कि क्या मेरा ये डर कुछ और होता या कम होता if we had seen more female cops in cinema, if we had seen more women acting as protectors of justice. क्या उनका आइडिया ऑफ जस्टिस अलग होता, क्या उनका आइडिया ऑफ वायलेंस अलग होता, क्या उनका वर्ल्ड व्यू अलग होता और उसकी वजह से मेरा वर्ल्ड व्यू अलग होता. There is no way to find out other than talking to creators of these characters who make these characters. Let's find out. So our guest tonight is someone I worked really closely with. In fact, इतनी नज़दीकी से हमने काम किया है कि we don't really know each other. थोड़ा सा distance चाहिए होता है किसी आर्टिस्ट को समझने के लिए. तो आज हम कोशिश करेंगे वो distance थोड़ा सा रखेंगे बीच में, हम उनको वहाँ बिठाएंगे, मैं यहाँ बैठूंगा और हम लोग बात करेंगे about his work, his life and his whatever his take on this very light topic we are talking about. Depiction of violence in cinema. So please welcome our guest, Mr. Vikramaditya Motwane. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
तो क्या हाल है आपके?
एकदम बढ़िया.
I think you just finished a long, like 2-year-long shoot.
I think everything in my life, as you know it, except for the thing we worked on together, has taken 7 years to make. So this is also taken one of those things. 6 साल लग गए. But yeah, shoot is done. Edit is almost done.
Okay. Amazing. So this is a show where we talk to creators, filmmakers, directors, writers about generally the depiction of violence on screen. And you have mostly made non-violent stuff. In fact, you made stuff which is so soft, so gentle. A lot of people, including me, were shocked that you called me for Sacred Games and said कि ये करना है, this book. And I generally मैं बहुत घबराता हूँ वायलेंस से, पुलिस से, गन से. I had never seen a gun till I was researching for Sacred Games. और हम लोग वहाँ पे एक कॉप के पास गए थे और उसने गन जब दिखाई and I was like, wow, this is so heavy. It was really, really heavy. The actual revolver Mumbai police uses. And I was like, okay, वो फिल्मों में जितनी आसानी से वो उंगली पे घुमाते हुए दिखाते हैं काफ़ी मुश्किल है. But what's your relation with violence? How triggering it is, or are you into violent cinema? There are slasher flicks, then there is a stylized violence. In सब से growing up, like what kind of cinema influenced you?
So I think growing up, like anybody from my generation and living here, I think growing up it was watching Mr. Bachchan's movies generally. As I don't think there was any other option at that point in time. कि हाँ, maybe Amitabh Bachchan first, Rishi Kapoor थोड़ा उसके पीछे in terms of. And I think because we all grew up with the one size fits all approach and the slightly sanitized approach to violence. Not that it wasn't there. I do think in the films that one has watched, whether it's Sholay or Diwar, there is a sense of violence but it's kind of kept subdued because of sensibilities, because of our censor board, who knows, at that time. I do think that the violence in that movie does bring out your own sort of inherent, what would you do, how do you feel about it. It's it can be sometimes, in the hands of the filmmaker, it can be very self-exploratory. You know?
So, did you ever feel whatever that influenced by it to make certain kind of cinema, or influenced by certain kind of cinema to make certain kind of cinema?
Specifically in terms of violence, no. I think that I'm a huge fan of, I think from that entire bunch, which for me was, I think, the most influential generation of filmmakers, I think, were the American and British filmmakers coming out of the 90s. Were for me the most influential. I'm still a huge fan of David Fincher. I think he's the greatest director of the modern era. So even after watching Seven, which I think did shake me up, I remember when I saw it, you know, and I saw it in the movie theater and all that sort of stuff, and it really shakes you up in that film. And there's a violence to, because you realize also that the violence is not just in the actions of people; it's also within the people itself. You know, Kevin Spacey's character just has so much, even though on the surface there's a calmness, that there's inherent sense of violence inside and rage inside that character is even scarier because of, so you get a sense of what people can do and what they can achieve. But no, I thankfully could sort of see it, but I wasn't that crazy about it. I'm like, mujhe aisa hi karna hai. I don't think that those are the kind of films that I wanted to make, at least in, you know, out in the beginning. I think working with Sanjay Bansali, for example, was, I think, more of an influence on me in terms of like a certain kind of cinema. I also believe, and I know that Anurag, for example, is very different because he was so inspired that that Panch is an extremely violent film that was banned by the censor board because you're chopping limbs and stuff like that in the film.
So there's that almost a pattern, which I don't know if you have thought of that as a pattern or something, but of stories of men who are, you know, who have no women in their lives, and then they have to deal with the loneliness or the violence of being a man themselves.
I think Nikhil Taneja, or was it Uday Bhatia, one of the two of them sort of said that, yeah, all your films are about men, and this is after seeing Trapped, they're like, Trapped is the one film where you've actually done it really, but your films are all actually about, metaphorically, men trapped in situations that they want to get out of. I said,
I think it was Uday.
It was Uday, I think, yeah. So I was like, okay, that's an interesting observation. I was like, aren't all films about that in a certain sort of way? I think Udaan eventually came from sort of it being, it's in a way a mixed, it's my own voice, which is, you know, taking from my own experiences a little bit. A lot of the books that I've ended up reading that sort of like, you know, have those kind of characters and that, I think it all just came together with a film, with that kind of film. It had a seed of it, and then it eventually came in. And then as films happen, you listen to a bit of music, and you listen to something else, and you know the story, the Indian Ocean ka, that whole story. So eventually it makes itself into something. I've realized over a period of time, and this is just me, and maybe this is because of your upbringing, is that when you are in school, even in a co-ed school, there is a very definite, in India at least, boys, girls, there is, you tend to do that. Yes, you are interacting, and yes, I've met my wife in school and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, we've had a 30+ year relationship and everything, but you still know boys better. And I've realized that while I've actually been writing, I've actually written scripts where I've had male characters and female characters, and 3 male and 3 female, and the male characters are very well defined and that kind of stuff, but the females seem to just merge one into the other. And I've realized that's one of my, so clearly I can write about men better. It's a flaw actually in a sense, because you want to be able to do better than that. And you're right, Udaan does come from a place which is, because it does talk a lot. It's a film about, you know, masculinity. It is a film about patriarchy. It is a film about a system that has been in place, and one person feeling that it should stay this way, and the other person opposing it directly and saying, no, it has to change. You cannot keep that patriarchy and a system going. And I think the lack of a woman in that film was a very conscious decision, because that's exactly what is missing in the film. And there's a scene, big scene in the ending, you know, where Rowan looks at the photos of his past, and his mother is very, very, very present in that. And it's a huge moment for him, because that's the void you realize has been missing in the entire film all this while. That's exactly what was not there. And I did actually shoot a bunch of flashbacks with mom and stuff.
Okay.
With my nephew was playing young, I shot it. Then I realized that actually, yeah, it's becoming too much. It's almost like, it almost felt that moment came out so much stronger because of the void. in a sense. Trapped, of course, is it's one character, one guy. It is that. Bhavesh, I realized afterwards that I should have, in hindsight. And there was a moment when Abhay and we had gone off to Alibag and we were writing the script together, where I suddenly one day said that shouldn't this be about a woman? Like, what if we made this about a woman? And we actually went and sat and it perfectly fell into place. Okay, it would be a girlfriend and a boyfriend, and there is a best friend, and they do this whole thing together. He ends up dying. She has to sort of take revenge, but no one believes that a girl can actually do this, and therefore it's actually all that much more interesting when the mask comes off at the end. That ये तो लड़की है. It fell into place, and I do. That's my one regret on that film. I feel that it should have. I think part of our not training, it's just that belief that's put into you is that it's heroes who greenlight movies and not heroines, which I think is completely wrong. And I think by the time I was making Bhavesh, also it had already become wrong. There was enough of a chance to be able to go out there and cast, fantastic, female actor who would have done justice to the film. But that is, sadly enough, every time you've gone and try to cast something, ke hero kaun hai? Heroine really didn't matter, which is very sad. Today, thankfully, it's changed. You can actually go and greenlight films based entirely on, and sometimes actually it's the range that female actors have here, and just the show is much better.
So 4 films before Sacred Games, and then you get into Sacred Games, which just the novel had 2 men holding guns, but it was a show, I think, which had more to it than just guns and gangsters. But what was your attraction to the novel, and why did you get involved in this?
Well, I mean, 2 things. I like the novel a lot. There was the opportunity of reading something and sort of and liking it. And I think my reaction was exactly the same. So when you kind of got into it, I think what I loved is about Vikram's novel was that it seems like such a small conflict. Cop's having the worst day of his life, gets a phone call from a gangster, and that changes his entire life. And so you're like, "Okay, chota hai." But that chota starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as the novel kind of goes along. And suddenly you're like, my God, this is a huge world. And I really liked that. And I thought that this will be so much fun to make. It'll be such a great thing to make, to be able to sort of see, you start from there and you expand into this, massive world which goes into, my God, cults and kahan chale gaye hum log, yaar. That was very exciting. And yes, there is that part of addressing it. Okay, how do you address the violence in this, by us, as how would you do it? I mean, I know exactly how Anurag would do it. He would embrace him and say, "Chalo, main karta hu."
Yeah. And there was that huge difference in terms of the 2 characters also are very different. So Gaitonde is what Anurag was basically handling or shooting. That was Gaitonde's arc, and you were working with Sartaj's arc.
Absolutely.
So there is that difference in the violence in the 2 arcs already in the script.
Already, but even in the approach, even for when, we had to do Kartikeya's death, for example. Those are the scenes that would kind of freak me out. I know there needs to be blood because of the repercussions of what actually sort of happens. Ke Sartaj is going to see his uniform with blood. So khoon to chahiye hi chahiye. But khoon kaise leke aayenge? So which is why it's but I'm not the kind of person who can ever see the wound going into the entire thing. Hota nahi hai mere se. It's even that. So the dream of Bunty slitting throat, right, was something that even then while shooting it, I'm like, it's a great visual, but am I pulling it off the right way? Do I even know what I'm doing? There was a lot of that. And I think it for me, I could pull that off because that was a dream sequence, so it felt like this is not real and therefore sort of do it. But in Kartikeya's death, for example, when it really happens, I'm trying to sort of also sort of work around the entire thing, but I can't show the violence of the moment myself. It's more the repercussions of somebody else's violence, on that, and therefore the blood dripping down the shirt and all that kind of stuff and all that. So I'll also approach violence in the little sort of sides. I can't do it.
Yeah. So not as stylized as what, let's say, what Tarantino has done. What you liked also on screen.
No, I think I liked it. I always find I'm more drawn towards implied violence in a certain sort of way. Udaan had it a lot. The father's an extremely violent character, but it's also very implied violence. There's a fear of him that's built up that when he raises his hand. And there is violence in that. There's a lot of violence in personalities. And I think that sometimes when that's even more, scarier than actually somebody raising a hand. Some of that is actually and there's a sequence in Bhavesh when the real Bhavesh Joshi, when he's caught, and for me that was a very tough scene to shoot again because it needed to be violent. I didn't want it to be gratuitous where you're seeing a guy getting the crap beaten out of him and blood and flesh, that kind of stuff going, but there's an implied violence in that scene which I feel it's almost you can see there's a hammer in the hand and there is rain falling and there is already blood dripping down somebody's face and you're like, "Arey yaar," it's like you want to turn your eyes away. So yeah, I mean, this scene requires you to be able to push it to a point where the audience gets there, but I don't think as a filmmaker I can take you to a point in time where I can make you go, wins. That's just not me.
Okay. Though we still chopped Sartaj's thumb.
That's true. See, you wrote that.
Yeah, I know. I know. Been able to so these are some of the things which we want to discuss. Like how much. So there's this thing about it adds to the drama. Okay, but also then there is that thing about social responsibility or your own limits of how much violence you can digest. So लिखना आसान है, शूट करना बहुत मुश्किल है because लिखने में आपने कागज पे लिखा है and you sometimes you don't even imagine what's going to happen. You just write it for the dramatic effect and then you realize what you have written is actually some people have to now go and shoot and create that. So do you think now the networks, like over the last 3 years, have things changed? Are networks ready to now, let's say, green light a show with 2 female protagonists, like a cop and a gangster, but both female, like a Sacred Games with all, 2. Do you think networks are ready for that, or would they?
I think they're ready now for. So what I believe has changed is we've seen it internationally. We see it now where female characters are playing a very, very strong role in not just viewership, but also in terms of a lot of the content that the networks are making. That is there for sure. There's a lot of things that are being greenlit right now. Whether it's a show like Mai, whether it's a show like She on Netflix,
or Arya,
or Arya, for example. I mean, they're all sort of like their leads are all female characters. So that is, I think that we've crossed that. I think we've crossed that Lakshman Rekha of the fact that it's only men that can greenlight things. I think that definitely, and in the series world more than movies for sure. Because there is a sort of like I'm guessing maybe because it's a viewership or just generally it's just sometimes they make for much more interesting characters. Actually, most of the time, especially when you're putting them into situations where they're the fish out of water situations, right? Like Arya is a fish out of water, Mai is a fish out of water, She is a fish out of water. All that kind of stuff, and it always makes it more dramatic. The conflict is always better. A woman has to sort of like become a gangster. Wow, it's always cool.
Okay, so now we will move to a slightly fun segment. तो अभी तक सब कुछ fun था मेरे ख्याल से, but फिर भी थोड़ा सा और fun करते हैं. So it's a segment called What If, where we'll throw scenarios at you, and you just have to react. Like imagine hypothetical scenarios, like जैसे कि what if you were making films in the 80s India, what kind of films would that be? Fitting into that time period में जिस तरह की फिल्में बन रही थी, which one would you probably be making?
I would, in the 80s film, I would be trying to make Subhash Ghai films, an early Subhash Ghai.
Okay.
Karz,
okay. Kali Charan. Achha. Okay.
that kind. I love those.
Okay. What if your first mentor, your first boss, Sanjay Leela Bhansali, if he made a crime thriller, like a slasher flick, what kind of film would that be?
I think he'd make a wonderful film if he was trying to do that. Sanjay is actually, even though his work isn't expressly, as in like, it's not about violent characters doing violent deeds, but there is a violence to Sanjay's filmmaking which Whether it's coming through his dance, whether it's coming through his shot taking or the use of wind or the use of, that kind of stuff, there is a violence in that filmmaking. I think that
it is very unsettling. A lot of his intensity is quite unsettling.
Devdas' drinking is a very violent act, and the whipping of the horse. I mean, all those things are there. So I think if we ended up making a crime thriller with slash and stuff, we'd do an amazing job of it. Because then the blood would flow and the knife would glint and it'll be it'll be something.
Yeah. It'll be like something. These 1,000 lights to light up one blade or something like that. वो है. What if? Do you think it is possible to write characters, like write the entire script with gender neutral characters and then assign, let's say, while casting, you decide, okay, whether Bunty has to be a male or a female, or Gaitonde has to be a male or female, or Bhavesh Joshi. Is it possible?
I think today, most of the time
it's possible. Like that?
Yeah. Most of the time it's possible, unless you're specifically talking about a character in a situation where they are fighting the patriarchy, whatever. I'm saying in that kind of stuff, where it needs to be a woman for a specific reason. I think 100% today you can make characters who are gender neutral because it's, I think when it comes to life or jobs or relationships or conflict or politics, I don't think the gender is assigned anymore by anybody to every job today there's equal opportunity in a lot of places and stuff. So so why not in movies also? I think we can. I think 100% we can.
So there is a corollary kind of a thing to this conversation, which is what makes a certain character a certain gender? Like, are there traits in the writing which kind of give it away or which kind of indicate to the casting or to the director कि हाँ ये character जो है, okay, there are, how generally we write with names, but there are so many of other characters which are, let's say, the peripheral characters or the secondary cast. उसमें बहुत सारे होते हैं, वो हीरो का दोस्त है, वो सिर्फ दोस्त है, it could be a male or a female. But how do you then come down to the idea that, okay, this has to be a male or this has to be a female? Are there any specific traits?
I don't think I'll be able to write something without knowing. Yes, I can adapt it afterwards. To be able to say, okay, I've written it for a girl, but this can easily be a guy. And it happens lots of times in casting also, when you're actually sort of like going out there and you're talking to managers, for example. But what if you take that role and make it? But it's happening in the sense that you can. I mean, everybody's in that sense. For the friends, I think for the other characters, it's always like what the interpersonal relationship is. No? How does the dynamic change if that character is female versus male? Does that character change? If you've written something for a female, you made it a male. How does that dynamic now work of what you've sort of thought in your mind? Because while we can interchange characters, I think, but there's also, you normally write for relationship dynamics, and a lot of that is written. And I do think a female to female and a female to male dynamic is still very different in the movies for sure.
Yeah. Just as a parting note, I would like to ask you one final question, which is, what is one change you would like to see in terms of depiction of violence on screen? Is there anything which you feel right now can be improved or can be changed or is not sitting well?
There has to be a justice system that has to work. I believe it's that. I think a lot of times we take into like whether it's vigilante movies where violence is the answer. And it's a simplistic way of saying it, but violence is never the answer. Even if in the moment it seems like whether a motive of revenge or whether something seems to be the answer on a very personal level, but I just feel on a societal level, it is not the answer. I feel if we have to have a justice system that must work. Violence is not the answer to the problems. It's not the solution to anything. A justice system is the answer to something. I was very consciously doing that in Bhavesh, even though it's a vigilante film. At the end of the film, the fact is that yes, vigilantism is to a certain point. It has to be justice that takes its course. The police have to sort of like do the justice, and the courts and the police must do justice. So it always especially when I see cop vigilante dramas, that really, really irritates me because it's like, that's not the solution. Taking a gun and going and shooting a politician is not the solution to anything. It's just that violence begets more violence, and it's just like, there is that. So, I believe that there needs to be a certain, and because cinema is influential, for all that we may think कि यार कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता, it is influential in a certain mindset. I mean, this portrayal of cinema in the 70s has kind of like, you know, the fact that police हमेशा आती है ना end में, it's always been that mindset that whatever it is, that there will be justice served in some sort of way at the end of the entire thing. And that's something that's always influenced me, and I believe that
even
that's...
in a revenge drama like Sholay, which is like out and out revenge drama. Like he takes revenge, Gabbar Singh takes revenge for his own humiliation by killing the entire family. Then Thakur
Correct.
has to take, and still the cops come.
Still the
right
cops
in
come
the
because the
end
courts have to
save
be
him.
able to say, because the courts have to decide and all that sort of stuff.
So there is this long debate about whether life imitates art or art imitates life. मतलब हम फिल्मों में ये दिखाते हैं. So one justification is people say कि वही हो रहा है, हम वही दिखाते हैं. The other is people, other way, whatever. The argument is people say कि फिल्मों में ऐसा हमने देखा इसलिए ऐसा हो रहा है दुनिया में. What do you think? What do you believe?
It's a bit of both, yeah. I think when it comes to the argument of like, oh, the male roles are these and female roles are these, we see it in our lives any which way. And I think that's part of the natural, sometimes extension of this, the way it's been with, and I actually think about this a lot in a weird sort of way, is that, okay, because we have a 7-year-old, yes, there is co-parenting, but obviously Ishika is taking the, you know, because that's just, the mother ends up being the one it is. And I do think but on the flip side, I do think a lot of the things that we've been seeing in our movies in terms of whether it's, you know, teasing girls or whether it's a certain amount of like, आदमी का हक औरत के ऊपर is also coming from our movies. Yes, there's a tendency for men to be jealous anyway, but the movies tend to glorify it even more, where it's almost making it you almost turn it into yes, कि हाँ तू hero है. If you are jealous and if you are insecure and all that kind of things, then you're a hero, because that's mardangi and all that kind of stuff. I feel that is kind of like just made more apparent through movies. So yes, I think there is a bit of both. I
think films feed certain kind of tropes and keep feeding them and keep glorifying them, and that has, and it's not like कि वो है नहीं सोसाइटी में वो ट्रोप, वो जो देवदास सिंड्रोम जो हमारे देश में हर लड़के को है कि मैं बेचारा हूँ और कोई मुझे छोड़ के चला गया and nobody, you know, really cared for me or valued me, वो जो एक inferiority complex, वो मतलब वो देवदास सबसे ज़्यादा बार I think देवदास के ही रीमेक हुए हैं. So there's that trope. So do you think, is there a way through cinema only to slightly alter these gender gender identifiers? Okay, men are mostly, you know, angry or insecure or those kind of, or full of ideas of revenge or ideas of possession or, you know, those things, and women are through cinema, women are forgiving, women are, you know, easy to understand situation, they are more sensitive, all that. Is there a way to make sensitive men as the core of whatever their identity through cinema? I think sensitive men exist anyway. I think Shah Rukh Khan has made a career out of being sensitive. So has Ayushmann Khurrana. I think there's been lots of actors who are sensitive and who have been sort of like sacrificing or whatever, not being necessarily macho and that kind of stuff. Yes, they are. It's the 1 out of maybe the quarter, 1 out of 4. You know, the rest of it will be the typical sort of filling into the patriarchal norms of what a hero ends up needing to be. Raksha Bandhan being an example of another movie that's coming, which is fulfilling exactly that kind of trope. I do believe the problem is also in not giving women agency. It's almost like in a lot of the movies that we've grown up seeing, and even today, is the fact that when a man loves a woman, it's not the woman has a choice to even say no in the first place. It's always like, yeah, ye to pyar to karegi hi uske saath. At some point in time, then it's my insecurity and I will be angry and I will go and all that kind of stuff. That we're feeding into that. It's almost like, boss, consent is not even a thing over here. Why? Kabir Singh on the So Kabir Singh being an extreme, but I think just generally, every love story that we've sort of grown up watching is that even though, you know, pehle na bol di, baad mein to haan to bol hi degi. Arre, but kyun bol degi? Bhai, na bol diya na, ek baar chhod do na usko. Do something else. I do think I definitely feel that is also feeds into the entire fact that I think women need to be given more agency, given the fact that a no means no or consent. I mean, the problem is in that when you do that, they become topical, right? Whether it's thappad or whether
any film that's talking about, then it's because they say, oh, we're talking about women empowerment, we're talking about women power. I just feel that needs to be normalized. Consent needs to be normalized. Those things, you know, these are things that I think in movies, and I think as we grow up and become more global in a certain sort of way,
Yeah.
I think that's what needs to happen.
So thank you, बहुत मजा आया आपसे बात करके, बहुत सारे insights मिले, and as I said शुरू में कि थोड़ा दूर बैठेंगे तो एक दूसरे को जान पाएंगे. So I think I got to know you a little more than I've been, you know, in the last.
After all those years, I feel very glad.
Yes. So thank you for talking to us, and thank you for whatever, trying to make the kind of cinema which we want to see, trying to make sensitive men, you know, as the central characters of your cinema. So thank you, and
thank you for having
lovely
me.
talking.
Lovely talking.
Our guest tonight, Alankrita Srivastava. You have created such immense body of work in a very short time, in the last, I would say, 5-6 years. Can you make a film only about men?
I guess if I was participating in a filmmaking challenge, I might. Not out of support. Someone was paying me like $5 billion.